The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Thursday, the 7th of August, 2025, and we are live here with Financial Rebellion. Good morning, Catherine. Good morning, Carolyn. We have an excellent guest this morning.
Yes, we do. Good morning, Polly.
All right, well, look, we're going to start with our conference because we're starting to add speakers day by day, and we're very excited that Catherine Austin-Fitz is going to be there. And Karen, we hope you're going to be there as well. But look, there's our speaker, Dr. Suzanne Humphrey's coming. She's very excited to see you, Catherine.
This is going to be incredible. I mean, you put Nass, Manukian, Humphreys, you, me, Brian Hooker.
Coming back. Ben Edwards, you know, the amazing doctor from who treated the measles children. He's completely my hero of the year for sure, that man. Love him.
And Andy Wakefield.
Jessica Rose is coming over. Of course, Kim McRosenberg. We've got all our Scott McCullough, Miriam, our EMR team are going to be there. So it is going to be, there's more to come, everybody. They're just adding them day by day. So it's going to be a huge conference, very exciting. So please do sign up. You can bunk up with people in bedrooms and, you know, hotel rooms and stuff. It's all fun. And get there. We want to see you. We want to meet you. Okay, so we didn't cover this yesterday, but we're going to just bring up this headline today. This is CHD saying this is a step in the right direction. RFK Jr. cancels $500 million in mRNA vaccine contracts. Now, as much as that is a step in the right direction, 100%, please do not get complacent about this. And it's kind of disturbed me that Bobby said at the end that they're going to be practicing safer, broader vaccine strategies. From my point of view, there are no safe vaccine strategies. That's my point of view. I don't like that talk, but I'm still grateful that we are at least one step in the right direction. But I still want you all to know we have a massive fight ahead of us.
So
this is not.
Polly, I just want to make sure we're all clear. The mRNA COVID shot remains on the childhood schedule, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not recommended that they take the COVID shot, but it's still.
But they're still giving it.
Yeah, because the terminology is you have to speak to your healthcare provider, which is the worst thing you can do, in my mind. Go to your pediatrician and ask them, because remember, they're being paid to give your children shots. So it's a massive conflict of interest. It's still extremely dangerous out there. We are nowhere near out of the woods with these mRNA shots or any vaccines whatsoever. But I will give him this. It is a step in the right direction, even though it's nowhere near fast enough for all of us.
Right.
Leave it at that, shall we? Unless anybody wants to add anything else to that.
Well, okay. And it is recommended for people over 60 or 65, right?
Well, it's not recommended by me.
As far as of course.
Absolutely do not touch any of these things. Listen, I just want to say one thing just before we move on. I, like many of you, have seen the undeniable health of the children turning into teenagers to adults that have had no shots, no vitamin K, no medical intervention at all. They are so healthy. That is what you want your child to be. Eat good food, breastfeed, all of those things that they did in the olden days. You do not need any toxins put into you. God did not make a mistake when he designed your baby. Whew, I had to get that out of my system. So what are we moving on to now? Catherine, I think you have something to say about a new interview at the Solari, right?
Yeah, so we've spent the Genius Act has passed, and we now have stable coins, which are essentially, if we read the act right, and I think we do, we've got a new piece coming out on this next week. It's really designed to be a privatized version of CBDC with extraordinary financial controls on it. So there's a great new interview we did with Darren Moore on stablecoins. We just published our wrap up with Mark Goodwin on stablecoins. They're excellent. But I also have a new introduction to our plunder wrap up, which is up at the homepage. And we've added other additions to our control grid collection. So this will help you understand where stablecoin fits into these pieces. And we have another piece coming out next week. So we're focused on the financial transaction freedom. And please, please, please use cash. If you go to our Financial Transaction Freedom website, there's a whole section on Team Cash, wonderful resources. Carolyn and Elizabeth Murphy are working on more resources to help you use cash. But anything you can do to make sure that the system, the analog transaction systems continue means a huge amount, because the last thing you want to do is get locked into the financial control. So
Yeah,
check
and
all
people
those
want
out.
cash. They want cash. Every time
They
I get
do.
cash from them, people are so grateful that times have changed. We went through a weird stage where people were like freaking out about cash, but now, you trust me, everybody wants cash.
Right, right.
So please, everyone, cash only. And if you're coming to the conference, you better not be getting those cards out or your QR codes, because guess who's going to be there? Catherine. You're going to be standing next to her in the line to get your coffee, do you? So come ahead. All right, well, should we introduce? Well, first of all, let's talk about, we're going to introduce our guest, but let's talk about the name of the show, because I need somebody to explain to me what that even means. So this show is named Preemption Prevention. Carolyn?
Yes, federal preemption is the concept brought in the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution that basically says if you have a federal law that is completely an impossibility to construe with a state law on the same subject, the federal law preempts. In other words, the federal law is in effect rather than the state law. And so there are a lot of cases where you're arguing over, well, how much is inconsistent, because you really have to have a direct conflict in order for federal law to preempt it. And so there are a lot of situations where at the state level, one would argue, well, this is not directly adverse. It can be read consistently, but we're bringing up this subject in connection with the proposals for what is effectively, if not literally, a federal liability shield for the manufacturers of deadly pesticides. And we have Dr. Munoz on to help us understand this really complex argument, because the manufacturers are coming out in the news saying, oh, this is not a liability shield. And, they've figured a way to write it so that it's hard to understand. And it does not say, oh, the manufacturers have a liability shield, as the kind of the PrEP Act is much more direct in doing that sort of thing. But Dr. Munoz is going to explain to us under the federal law that controls pesticides, rodenticides, and herbicides.
Well, let's bring her on. Alexandra, welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for being here. We hear so many good things about you, do we not, Catherine and Karen?
Yes, unbelievable. So we got to know about Dr. Munoz's work because of her help with our lobbyist, Elizabeth Murphy in Tennessee. So Elizabeth has been working for years to roll back the liability protections that vaccine makers have. And now we have the pesticide makers showing up both at the state and the federal level to roll back or to get liability protection, which could have really absolutely frightening impact on our health. And so Elizabeth is there in Tennessee trying to argue this back. And Alexandra, how did she meet you? How did you two get hooked up?
Well, it's great to be here to talk about this with you all. Thank you. I met Elizabeth right after I gave testimony in the committee hearing in Tennessee, and she just came up to me and was like, let's talk about this and what's trying to happen and how we can stop it. And so that's how we initially met. And I just showed up in Tennessee because I felt called to be there, just as I felt called really deeply by God to stand against this piece of legislation. And so I've been in the process of learning all of the different pieces of the legal code and preparing things in order to help stop it in the different states and federally.
So describe your background for us, because one of the reasons you were so effective in Tennessee was you really have a very strong background in these topics. So describe a little bit about what your background is, what your experience is, and what you do.
So my training is as a molecular toxicologist. I have a master's of science and a PhD in molecular toxicology, which means that I specialize in understanding the molecular mechanisms by which toxins induce their impact, and by which they cause cancer at the cellular level, and also by which they cause endocrine disruption. And so my specialty is really this fine detail. And there's been a lot of questions around the carcinogenicity of glyphosate that have centered in a lot of the conversations related to this legislation because it's being pushed by Bayer, the makers of Roundup, which contains the active ingredient of glyphosate in it. And they've, as part of their sort of defense of their company over the years, they've taken the stand that glyphosate is totally safe and have actively suppressed a lot of information about its carcinogenicity. So when I was reviewing the data myself for glyphosate, I saw that the molecular mechanisms of how it operates really do make it a carcinogen. And it's very clear to me as a molecular toxicologist that that is what's happening here. So that's how I came into this, and I provided testimony correcting the record about the carcinogenicity of glyphosate in Tennessee because the lobbyists and a number of representatives had been saying that there was only one study showing that it might be a carcinogen, and that's completely untrue. There's a lot of studies showing that it is a carcinogen.
And Alexandra, just to be absolutely clear to our people, what we're saying is glyphosate can and does cause cancer.
That's correct. Yes, glyphosate by itself causes cancer. There's a lot of evidence showing that in animal models, especially the most recent study from the Ramazzini Institute that shows that even very low levels of glyphosate alone can induce various forms of cancer. But in addition, glyphosate-based herbicides, which includes things like Roundup, when they're in these formulations that include other chemicals like surfactants that help drive the glyphosate and other chemicals into the cells, those are definitely carcinogenic and cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And there's a lot of epidemiologic evidence showing that these chemicals in these formulations do cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of cancer in people.
And Alexandra, there are a couple of ways that you could get cancer from this, right? You could be someone who's spraying the glyphosate, the Roundup, and you're a farmer or whatever, and you don't have a mask, and you're ingesting, you're breathing it, but then it also comes through the plants that are sprayed, and we find it in the foods. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the lawsuits for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are centered around the dermal exposure, so the skin exposure from the Roundup formulations, and that is a different exposure pathway than what happens with the food. The food exposure is slightly different, and it still has negative impacts, but the lawsuits in the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are centered on the Roundup exposure through the skin. That seems to be the most dangerous route of exposure for these chemicals.
Just terrific.
And we're talking about paraquat is the other chemical that is largely affected by this proposed language, correct? And that's manufactured by Syngenta, is that right?
Yeah, paraquat is manufactured by Syngenta, which is owned by ChemChina, a Chinese military corporation. And paraquat is banned in China because it's unsafe, but is being sold here in the United States, even though there's a lot of evidence showing that it causes Parkinson's disease.
I see. And what might we know that chemical under the name of? There's a T4 or something, or?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think most people know it as paraquat, but there might be other names that I'm not aware of.
Okay.
But it also applies to this legislation applies to over 1,200 active ingredients that are registered at the EPA. and over 57,000 products that those ingredients are used in. So this is not just about paraquat and glyphosate. This is about an entire chemical inventory that is being given immunity under this legislation, and all of the companies that are operating in that space, and all future chemicals that are registered under FIFRA, and all future companies that decide to operate in this space once this space has immunity. And that's really where I start to be very, very concerned about the impact of this legislation on the future generations, because this is a very broad provision that will apply to many chemicals and many companies that have clearly do not care about the health of people and how their products are impacting people.
So it's fair to say, just like after the liability shield passed for vaccines, we saw a lot more vaccines get on the schedule and a lot more people get sick. So aren't what we're saying is if we give such a liability shield, then the industry is free to do things that take on significantly more risk.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what's so dangerous here, is that we already know that they're willing to sell things that they know cause cancer without a cancer warning. They're willing to sell things that cause Parkinson's disease without a Parkinson's warning. They're willing to sell endocrine disruptors and things that impact fertility without any warnings. What are they going to sell when nobody can sue them?
And this is the big issue is under the what's called FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. And the EPA is the federal agency that has jurisdiction over that act. But it really isn't a situation where there's, as I understand it, where the EPA can come in and do anything other than regulate the labels. Is that the bottom line? And so we're talking about labeling issues mostly?
Well, there's a few aspects of FIFRA that the EPA is involved in. There's the registration of the chemicals, then there's the labeling, and then there's the misbranding provision. And under FIFRA, companies submit their own data to the EPA, so they can structure their studies in any way that they want, essentially. And there's a lot of corruption that we've seen in terms of the data that they do submit. So in terms of what Section 453 does, is that it blocks funding for a particular type of label update regulated under FIFRA, under Section Q of the misbranding provision. And under that section, companies are asked to update their labels with correct, more recent scientific information about the harmful impacts that their products may have, so that people are properly warned and have informed consent before they use them. Now, in all of these lawsuits that Bayer is facing for Roundup and the lawsuits around Parkinson's disease, the reason that these companies are held liable is because under the misbranding provision of FIFRA Section Q, they're required to provide an update that extends beyond what the EPA may have already said about that, to be up to date with recent information and with their own knowledge of the product. And they're failing to provide the update under Section Q. When you have Section 453 come online and it blocks funding to approve a label update that contains information that conflicts with the EPA's assessment, then the company can say, it was impossible for us to update this label. We couldn't possibly comply with the state's product liability code to warn, because as you can see, there's no funding to approve a label change that conflicts with the APA. Therefore, we could never warn about cancer, and you can't hold us accountable under state product liability code. And that's what they're trying to get here.
And as I understand it, there's sort of an automatic renewal of your label every 15 years. And that's the only instance in which the label could be updated. And so if they block if they say that you can't do anything that's inconsistent with what came out in your last review, and the reviews have all taken place, let's say 5 years ago, it's another 10 years from now before there would be a revisiting of the label. Is that how it works, or am I sort of
there's some sort of different timelines involved, but essentially, yes, there's essentially going to be a delay between when the pesticide active ingredient has been evaluated. So there's sort of the active ingredient evaluations, and then there's the product registrations. And those are two different mechanisms at the EPA, both of which can create a lag here in terms of accurate information on the label. So when an active ingredient like glyphosate is initially registered and goes through an EPA assessment where it gets the human health carcinogenicity classification, that's essentially what's being blocked from changing. So if the EPA says glyphosate's not a carcinogen and the company wants to say on their label that it is, that this may cause cancer, with Section 453, that label change cannot be approved. There'll be no funding to approve it. And so that's how it essentially does freeze those labels with the old classifications in time, and the labels won't have the most up-to-date science on them, essentially.
And you need that label warning in order to take it into court and say, and bring a lawsuit for health damage for Parkinson's disease or whatever, right?
Well, you have to refer to the label during these lawsuits. And so essentially what the industry is trying to do right now is they're trying to say that this is how they're operating at both the state and federal level, is that they want the EPA approved labels to be the final word on warning people. That at the state level, it will be presumed to be sufficient to satisfy their duty to warn. And at the federal level, it locks the EPA's classification in place so that they couldn't change it. And you have to refer to the label in order to sue. If the company did adequately warn on the label, then they wouldn't be liable for any of these lawsuits. There wouldn't be a problem. If Roundup said this may cause cancer, no one would be able to sue them for it causing cancer. But they refused to add that warning, and that's why they're still liable for these lawsuits. But with 453, they wouldn't be.
Why would they not be willing to just warn people that it causes cancer?
Because they're concerned, I think, about losing sales. You know, when people know that something may cause cancer and they're spraying it in their yard where their kids are, they're getting it on their hands and on their feet, then that's a serious exposure. And if people knew that that serious exposure was happening in their own homes from this product they just bought at Home Depot, would they really still buy it? They might not. And that's their big concern.
Could there be such a thing as a state label or not that's inconsistent under FIFRA? Could California say you have to warn about glyphosate and put it on a California label for anything sold in California?
Well, my understanding of 453 is that it will block state labels if they contain information that conflict with the EPA's classification. So if California wanted to say glyphosate is carcinogen and they wanted to have companies put that on their label, they wouldn't really be able to require it, because the EPA ultimately still has to approve the label that's on the bottle. And now the EPA can approve a label that has information that conflicts with its own classification.
So EPA would have to approve even a label that the state has mandated, and that would make it an impossibility to construe both of those laws, the federal law and the state law, together, right?
That's my understanding of it, yeah.
So I want to jump in and ask why the states and some of the representatives at the federal level are supporting this. But before I do, Polly, did you want to ask something?
Exactly what I was going to ask, Catherine. So great.
Oh, okay. So I was shocked when I heard from Elizabeth why some of the representatives in Tennessee would ever support this. One of the reasons, of course, Farm Bureau was in there saying, you know, if we don't support this, then pesticides will stop selling pesticide in our states and agriculture will collapse. But Alexandra, could you describe both at the federal level and the state level, what is because what this is madness. It's complete madness. We have an entire Make America Healthy revolution going on to try and clean up our food supply. And at the same time, we are now moving to do something that will destroy our food supply. So what have the representatives who've supported this, both at federally and at the state level, what's their argument as to why it's such a great idea to poison our kids?
Well, they don't really see it that way at all. And I think that's where we have this big disjunct happening is that the legislators who are in support of this provision oftentimes have told me that these chemicals are totally safe when used properly. So I think that's problem number one is a lot of them don't have first experience of getting cancer or some disease from these products, or they don't realize that it's from that. So they tend to think things are safe, and the lobbyists are definitely pushing this narrative that the company, that Bayer has a lot of frivolous lawsuits from sort of mean trial lawyers that are trying to take advantage of them, and that they're going to go out of business because they're paying all these fees. And when they go out of business, there'll be no glyphosate available for the farmers, and this will eventually lead to a global food shortage. And I've heard many people explain that very narrative to me. So that is definitely how they are pushing this. And there's lies along that whole narrative. There's many problems with what they're saying. And they're also saying that this doesn't create a liability shield in some cases. So they'll just say this is just a labeling clarification, or this is just clarifying existing laws, and it doesn't do anything. Well, if it doesn't do anything, then why do you need it so badly, right? This clearly does something, or they wouldn't be investing millions of dollars in lobbying and convincing everyone that they need it.
That's the question, though. What does it do that they think is so great? Make our crops green and beautiful and don't mold, grow things fast. What is the purpose that they think of glyphosate and similar products? That our grass is super green, things like that. Is that it?
Oh yeah, they want super green grass and, sort of this ease of the chemical farming that it provides. And, that's definitely on the industry side what they're going for. And then in terms of the legislation and 453, they're definitely trying to obtain this liability shield. And, Bayer has admitted it on their own website, saying that they are trying to deal with this problem of litigation, and they still think glyphosate is safe, but they are doing different things in order to stop the litigation. And there you go. There's their statement saying that they fully stand behind the safety of their glyphosate products. So this is, it's just not, and they're pursuing several measures to end their litigation. And this is exactly what they're doing.
But isn't that just one big lie? They must know their products are bad. People have sued them for exactly that. So why put out a statement like money? Is it all about money? I'm trying to get to the bottom of why you would push something that kills American people.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think they clearly know. We've seen the emails from the Monsanto papers that were released during discovery, where the Monsanto scientists Monsanto was originally the company that sold Roundup, and now Bayer has purchased them. And so all of these documents have been revealed in discovery that show that the Monsanto employees and toxicologists clearly knew there was a problem. They avoided doing testing. They intentionally ghost wrote papers. They've created a fake controversy around whether glyphosate is safe. And a lot of people believe it. And why are they doing it? I don't know. I can only imagine that it has to do with money and, potentially some other nefarious agendas. But this is their plan, and they're sticking to it very clearly. They could change their label at any time and end the litigation, and they're not doing that.
So let me show you. I sent some stock charts, Lou. Can you pull them up? So if you take a look at Bayer's stock, this is the long-term look from 2000 on. When did they buy the part of Monsanto's business that had glyphosate, Alexandra? What year was that?
I think it was 2018 that it finished.
Right. So if you look at their stock, go back to the stock chart. What happened was somebody didn't do a successful due diligence. They bought the Monsanto and then started to get hit with the lawsuit subsequent. And you can see their stock has dropped dramatically since that time. So the lawsuits have had a very serious effect, not just on the piece of the company they bought, but on their whole company. So let's look at their stock. So last year they started to make a big press at the state level and then the federal level to get liability protection, and they've gotten some states. So pull up their year-to-date stock chart. So let's look at their most recent one. this is just 2025. And as you can see, their stock chart, I'm comparing their stock, which is up 63% this year, is in comparison to the VGK and the S&P. So the S&P is up 7%. That's the US equity markets. And then the European equity markets are up 20%. But Bayer is up 63%. I'm not familiar with the company. I don't follow their stock. But my guess is one of the reasons their stock is performing well is their investors are encouraged by the fact that they are gaining liability protection in at least some of their markets. So you have a very win-lose relationship between the consumer and the stock investor.
And Alexandra, can you tell us about the Georgia and North Dakota laws?
Well, I was just looking at that stock chart, and it does look like, I think, did it say in April was when it started to increase the
Yeah. So
right.
it
So
started
that's
moving
around
up in
when
April.
the Georgia and North Dakota laws got passed, I believe. We could maybe look at where that changes.
And
It
when
might
when
be-
did the bill get sponsored in Congress?
Well, it got added to the Appropriations Bill on July 14th, I think.
So Lou, let's go back and look at the chart. So North Dakota and Georgia is in April, and then July is it gets added to the bill in Congress.
Yeah, and you can see probably where that spike is. That's probably right when it got added.
Right, right. Right. So there are other things going on, but because this litigation has been so depressing on the company's stock performance, it wouldn't surprise me, because they're committing major resources to this lobbying effort, major resources. And I think I saw one press release that implied it was 1.3 billion Bayer gives for this is to both settle the litigation, but also to deal with the lobbying. So this is a real campaign on their part.
Absolutely. They're investing a lot of money and advertising and convincing of farmers that will then convince their representatives. This is a full-on campaign that they have going to get this legislation through at the state and federal levels.
And now,
And
Alexandra, do you know who the key people are? If people want to write to their congressmen or senators, who are the key people who should be, pressure should be put on? Is it the Agriculture Committee? Is it, presumably it's just the House at this point, but does it make any difference whether you contact your senators over it to try to keep it from going into the Senate version?
So I think that it's definitely important to contact your own personal representatives in the House, and especially to contact any Republican representatives, because what we're seeing is that the support for this is falling on party lines. And right now, the Republicans are the main supporters of this legislation. So in order to change the tide of what's happening in the House, we're going to need more than just any committee to change their mind at this point. We're going to need the full Republican caucus to understand that this is a voting issue, that this impacts the fertility of future generations, and that this is not a protection that this industry should be given by any stretch of the imagination in order to make America healthy or protect even to protect ourselves as a nation, because this is giving foreign companies that sell known toxins immunity. That doesn't make sense either from a national security perspective. So making it clear to any Republican representatives that this is an important issue for the Republican Party as well is very critical right now. So I think reaching out to those in the House and even the Senate is important. The Senate doesn't look like they're going to add it into the bill, but if it passes through the House, then the legislation is going to go into a conference committee where the Senate may then choose to support the language. So making sure that they also understand that this is not something that people want is very important as well right now.
And if people are writing, let's say, writing emails to their congressional representatives, we're talking about the Appropriations Act of 2026, and it could actually go into the agricultural bill later on if it doesn't work in the Appropriations Act. But what you're talking about is Section 453 of the is this of the FIFRA or of the Appropriations Act?
Yeah, it's section 453. The bill, I think, still has not been given a number, so we can't refer to the bill by a number, but it is the Federal Interior Appropriations Act of 2026. I think there might be some slight difference of the actual official title, but it's the Interior Appropriations Bill.
Right. And I wrote into my congressional representative and I said, I'm against all liability shields, in particular, the one for insecticides, the spraying. And I didn't mention 453, but presumably the people in Congress know that Section 453 is what they're calling it, and that's what you're opposing. So you don't want Section 453 added to the Appropriations Act.
Well, now we want it removed because it already has been added. But yes, I think referring to Section 453 specifically is important right now because a lot of representatives actually don't know that this confers a liability shield or de facto immunity to the industry because, as you can see in the language, it doesn't say anything about that. And the lobbyists and the leadership are telling the people in Congress that all it does is prevent a patchwork of labeling, like different labeling across the states. So they're giving a very inaccurate description of it. So you will need to, when you're emailing people, you'll need to say, I oppose any type of liability shield for the pesticide industry, for chemicals regulated under FIFRA. And you specifically want Section 453 removed from the Federal Interior Appropriations Bill before the House vote on it.
Right. And if you want to educate them, you can just say, I believe this is effectively a liability shield, even though the manufacturers are saying that it's not, because it will prevent lawsuits at the state level for people who are injured.
That's right. Yeah, it will prevent those lawsuits. And there's some additional resources online at Stand for Health Freedom. They have some handouts, I believe, that are available that people can reference if they want more detailed information to put in their emails.
Right.
So let me ask a question that happened in Tennessee. There was a lawyer who testified in Tennessee, and I was watching some of the videos. And she said, as a practical matter, because it was being pointed out that even if this passed, you could still sue for fraud. And she explained why, as a practical matter, you wouldn't be able, even if the companies had behaved in intentionally fraudulent ways and you could prove it, it would make suing them as a practical matter essentially impossible. And so that as a practical matter, they would end up getting liability from fraud as well. Do you remember what that was about?
I think that my understanding of it is that when in the legislation under Tennessee, people could still technically file a lawsuit, but most of those claims would never make it past the first motion to dismiss because in order to even have a claim about fraud, you have to refer to the label on the product. And the legislation in Tennessee is presuming that the label is sufficient to warn people. And so any case that somehow needs to refer to the label, which is every case for a product regulated under these spaces, would then not be able to proceed because the label is presumed to be sufficient.
And around you go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that's incredible, I learned this working in Washington, but also dealing at a state legislative level. It's always amazing to sit and watch people on the other side of the argument just flat out lie and just lie and just flat out lie. And you really haven't learned to be good at the game until you get, you get good at dealing with people who just lie flat out. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's actually been sort of the most incredible thing for me to watch with all of this because I haven't participated at this level in politics before. But to see everyone just consistently and completely lying about the safety of glyphosate, about the impact of this legislation, about whether or not people would still be able to sue, about the fact that there'd be a global food shortage, just over and over again. Their only strategy appears to be to completely lie.
Right, right. Well, I think that's what Elizabeth told me is one of the reasons you were so effective in Tennessee is because of your knowledge and experience, and you're not approaching this as a professional, liar, but simply as a scientist, explaining the facts in a very, I think my impression is you're very good at teaching. And by just rolling out the facts and teaching representatives about what the real science and real facts were, it had a remarkable impact when everybody said, "Oh, I'm used to in Tennessee hearing, oh, it's hopeless, there's nothing you can do." And then somebody comes in and starts talking about the facts. And, a lot of the legislators really do respond to the facts when they can get them. But, and that was what was so wonderful about what happened, at least in Tennessee. But apparently it didn't happen everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, I think, what was so shocking to me too, was that as I was speaking to those representatives, I realized nobody had ever told them the truth about this. They hadn't even
Right.
been given the opportunity to make a real decision because they had only been hearing the lies about it. Nobody had
Right.
presented them with the facts about what the legislation would do, or even how many chemicals this was going to give immunity to. That alone is shocking and can change the minds of a lot of legislators when they realize this isn't just about glyphosate and Bayer. This is about over 1,200 chemicals that have already been registered and all future chemicals. That piece of information alone can bring a lot of clarity and truth to legislators who are in the position to make a decision about this legislation.
Right. And that's why when people say it's hopeless, it's never hopeless because it's amazing how much can happen if we don't leave the playing field under the control of people who are lying. If you say, it's not worth our time, it's not worth our effort, you can't do anything. Well, no, you just, it facts matter, the law matters, representatives, there are a lot of great state representatives and federal too. They will listen, but you have to get in there and communicate the facts and educate them. So it's to me it's remarkable what can be done if you will get in there and do it. And that's why, I was so encouraged by what you've done. Now you've worked in Tennessee and in North Carolina. Have you spent time in Washington on this as well?
Yes, I was in Washington just earlier in July. As soon as the language came out, I went there and started to meet with representatives and find out what they thought it meant. And again, there were just a lot of lies. So,
But did the representatives listen? Did their staff listen?
to an extent, I think that, I'm an expert in toxicology, and now there's a lot of the argumentation around this is about what the legal interpretation is. So they're, I think, less likely to take my word for it, even
Hmm.
though I've spent many, many hours now studying the code and speaking with a number of lawyers to make sure that I accurately understand the language. They were inclined to instead believe what the leadership in the party was telling them the language meant, which was that it's blocking this patchwork of state labeling to make it easier for the companies. So
So
they don't think it's a liability shield right now, or at least that's what they're saying.
So Brooke Rollins has gone in as the head of the department. What has the administration been willing to do on this issue? Do you know, do they have a position?
I'm not familiar with that aspect of it.
I have a question. I find that the best way for people to get people involved is okay. We can talk about glyphosate and how we think it's dangerous, the other side think it's not, and all that kind of stuff. But you mentioned infertility. We've heard about cancer and we've heard about Parkinson's, but what are the symptoms of taking these poisons? That's what I want people to know. Why your child is behaving like that. And you, like I say, you mentioned infertility, which is a huge problem at the moment. What do you know about that and the symptoms?
So, infertility is a really complex type of issue to address. And when we're looking at this legislation and its relationship to infertility, I think that this is one of the most dangerous threats to infertility at the population level that we could have. Because this is a class of chemicals that has there's many chemicals here that we're talking about all at once. And so when we generalize about it, we can say that some of those chemicals are known carcinogens, some of them are known neurotoxins, and some of them are known endocrine disruptors. And the endocrine disruptor chemicals are the ones that can really impact fertility. And we know that a lot of chemicals regulated under FIFRA are endocrine disrupting chemicals. And currently, the EPA's program to identify and label endocrine disrupting chemicals is essentially non-existent. They're not doing a good job of that at all. And so there's things like glyphosate, which is an endocrine disruptor, which can impact the proper sexual development of girls and lead to a masculinization effect on them that can later in life lead to things like PCOS that can affect fertility. So a lot of times things like glyphosate or atrazine or other pesticides and herbicides that have an impact on the endocrine system, when those exposures occur in utero or in early childhood or even during sensitive windows of development in adolescence, single exposures, low exposures can alter sexual development in ways that last for a lifetime and that ultimately lead to infertility through things like reduced sperm count or PCOS or other types of conditions that can occur from these exposures. So I think that that's really very unrecognized in terms of how dangerous this legislation is. That's why I'm so deeply concerned about it, is because I see a class of chemicals that's already being improperly regulated for its impact on fertility, and then to remove the last mechanism of accountability on this industry could potentially lead to a catastrophic exposure at a population level that leads to infertility for an entire generation of children.
So this is a national crisis. I mean,
Exactly.
And so another question, you may not want to answer this, but I know our viewers we're hungry for information. And so when it comes to the food, what do you have in your cupboard? Are you very careful about what you eat? I mean, we even hear from Zen Honeycutt that, and Kelly Ryerson, that some of the organic cereals have glyphosate in them. I mean, like, it's deeply disappointing and very worrying when you go out to shop. What can you get for your children, for yourself?
Yes, I'm very careful about what I eat, and as much as possible, I try to source my food directly from regenerative farms who are using very careful farming practices that don't include chemicals. And so I try to just eat what's in season and what's available, and then if not, I try to choose organic whole foods and cook them myself. I don't eat very many processed things because you never really do know at this point what's in things. We're seeing levels of glyphosate and metals and things that there shouldn't be. And there's so many issues with soil contamination and the supply chain that it's hard to always know exactly what you're getting. So preparing your own food and sourcing quality, regenerative farmed or organic ingredients is, I think, the best way to reduce exposure.
What do you think the chances are that we could get restaurants to actually stand up and give us food that doesn't have all of these contaminants in them?
I think it's possible. I think we're starting to see that with some restaurants, changing their menus and realizing that this is an important issue for a lot of people. So I think that's in the process of happening. But of course, there's just larger questions about the supply chain of food that I think often lead to the presence of these toxins in the food. And those types of issues are going to need to be addressed at a bigger level and with sort of the proliferation of smaller regenerative farms as well. So.
And learn
So
to ask
just
questions as well when you're at a
on-
farm. and stuff like that. You ask questions. This is what Kelly Ryerson was telling us yesterday. Ask them, uncomfortable as it is, do they spray? Do they have chemicals on their crops?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So on Money and Markets this week, we showed a new graph that showed the percent purchasing of local food by different economies. And one of them was the one with the most purchases of local food. And I know this because it happens to me whenever I go there. 45% of people buy their food from local farms, local food systems in Switzerland. And in the United States was the lowest shown, 10%. Now, here's what's interesting. Switzerland's healthcare system costs 88,500 a year per capita, and the United States is 13,500 a year per capita. And that's what you see in Europe. We spend a lot more for food. We buy a lot more locally in Europe, but you pay a lot less in healthcare costs.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a going thing.
It's definitely, I think, worth the investment to buy locally and choose things that you can get that are low in toxin burden. It definitely seems to have an impact on people's health.
Well, Alexandra, do you agree with let's say the large farming interests, like, I don't know, Cargill and companies like that, who say that basically you can't have large scale farming without using these chemicals?
I'm not a farming expert, so I can't go into that, I would say, in detail. But generally, I mean, I think the way the systems are built right now, they are reliant on chemicals. And we do need to acknowledge that as we move towards other solutions, right? It's not a change that can necessarily happen overnight, but I think it is a change that can happen. And as soil is remediated and as ecosystems are remediated, then farming in a way without chemicals does become possible. But it does take commitment and education and a series of planned changes to make that kind of transition.
We were talking last night, actually, funnily enough, about how can we fix America's soil, because we heard how toxic the soil is, and not just on the farms, in our gardens as well, due to the rain or whatever it is that's being sprayed everywhere. What would you suggest we do to fix America's soil? And I know you're not a gardener. I mean, a farmer, sorry.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the right person to ask that question to. I think that the sort of, as a toxicologist, the first thing I would say is that we need to stop using so many chemicals, because I think a lot of times what I've noticed when people are supporting use of chemicals in any type of situation is that they only focus on the impact of the chemical on the thing that they're interested in, right? So if they're trying to control weeds, then they're like, this is really good at controlling weeds. But what are all the other impacts of that chemical? These things don't happen in isolation. When something has a chemical property that allows it to kill something, that chemical property is going to have other impacts. That's the way that chemistry works. It's not just selectively impacting one thing. There's a change in the chemistry that is going to impact other things. And so we have to consider, what is the impact on the microbiota? What is the impact on the different fungal components of the soil? What is the impact on the other parts of the ecosystem that are reliant on the plants that this is killing, or on the pollinators? All these things are interconnected. And when we look at the impact of a single chemical, we can't just look at the impact that we're interested in. We have to look more broadly at all of the different biological systems that this chemical can be interacting with, and consider those impacts as we move forward and start reducing things in a way that conserves ecosystems' ability to function as an ecosystem and for people's health to function optimally.
And the famous quote from Dr. Wakefield is, if you give nature a chance, it will restore itself. It will get back to how it should be. But the good news is it can be done.
So I just wanted to, I put a link in the chat. We have a great interview we just did with Pat Militek, who is a world famous WEF fighter. He and some scientists, all of whom had been sort of poisoned as kids in their farm country, have created a business called Soil Savers. And they're showing people how to rebuild their soil without pesticide and farm without pesticides.
Right.
And I know and see a lot of people who are working on these solutions. And, it can be done, but you need to make the commitment. And right now, unfortunately, what we're watching is an enormous amount of the capital in our society is being spent to persuade Congress to keep the current model going when it's clearly failing. I mean, you referred to this as a national crisis. I think we're talking about an extinction level event between vaccines and now what we're talking about with pesticides. We're basically talking about long-term poisoning of the population in very significant ways. And if you look at what's happening to productivity in the economy, it's having a dramatic impact.
Yeah. And
So,
EMR, to leave that out.
absolutely.
Alexandra,
Absolutely.
how can people follow you on social media or learn more about the work you'll do and keep up to date?
People can find me on X at AM Toxicology and also on Instagram at Dr. Munoz. And I will be updating and also on my website, there's information. And I've been providing live updates of what we're doing with the advocacy around Section 453 and at the state level on both Instagram and X. So if people are interested in keeping up with that, they can follow me there. And I also teach a course for parents about how to reduce children's exposure to endocrine disruptors at home. So that's another way to engage with me, and you can find that on my website.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Amazing. You are amazing. And we're very grateful that you came on the show this morning to educate us. And I think, as you said, Catherine, this is something that's just not spoken enough about. This is a crisis, like the vaccines are a crisis. It's the same thing.
Well, yeah, so it's the same thing we saw when we looked at the confirmation hearings. You're talking about an extinction level event. You're talking about creating an environment where parents, I mean, and Alexandra knows because you're teaching parents how to do this. Parents are having to navigate a system which is increasingly more and more dangerous to the health and the success of their children. So bringing a child up to be successful in this environment, it's an extraordinary and complex task. And that's why, we have to bring transparency to what's happening, and we have to work together on it, which is why we're so grateful that you came today. And I just want to give a plug. What a difference you made in Tennessee. I know from talking to Elizabeth what a difference you made in North Carolina and the other places you're going. So I would just ask this audience, one of the things you can do, we have a real hero with us, and one of the things you can do is to support her. And we would really appreciate support coming her way. So share her social media, share her website. If you need that course, take that course. Tell people about this work because it's so very important. And again, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well from all of us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I really do think that we are looking at a potentially extinction level event with all the exposures that we have here and the declines that we're already seeing in sperm counts and fertility worldwide. Additional exposure through this Section 453 is potentially catastrophic to what is already a very concerning exposure level of endocrine disruptors from plastics and pesticides and all the other things that people are facing. So it is important for parents to understand how to protect their children from these exposures. And it's also important that we stop Section 453 in its tracks and any other types of liability shield for this industry.
Amen to that. Thank you, Alexandra, so much. And thank you to Carol and Catherine again for just an amazing show. We'll be back next week with more Financial Rebellion. And tomorrow, Brian Hooker, Dr. Hooker, will be with you. But now we're going to go to our story of the day from a medical professional. Thank you, everybody. All right, we're live. So can you tell us your name, please?
My name is Beth Peterson.
And what kind of a nurse are you?
I'm a critical care nurse.
Okay. So do you want to go back and talk about what you saw? Do you want to talk about an injury? What is it? Because did you take the COVID shot?
I did not.
You did not. Okay.
So can I start with a little bit of a bio?
Yes, please
That kind
do.
of
Please do.
Plays into my
Yeah.
motivation. I took a genetics class in high school, and I loved science. So when I learned about the central dogma that DNA makes RNA and RNA makes protein, I realized that I've always been sort of a religious person, but I saw that the finger of God was in our genetic components, and so we had discussions, ethical discussions about what would you do if they ever tried to genetically modify humans, and that was ridiculous back then. That was a long time ago, and but I made a decision when I was 18. I would never allow that because God creates us, and he puts his fingerprint on us in our genetic code. And so anyway, that little did I know that would come into play many years later when I decided whether or not to get this vaccine. But for me, it was deeply religious and deeply personal not to receive an mRNA vaccine for that reason, because I felt like it would come between my relationship with God. So
Would it be possible for you to speak up a bit?
Yes.
Sorry, it's just
I'm sorry.
the generator is really loud
Okay.
behind us, so thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, do carry on.
So I went on to study genetics, and I got a degree in biochemistry, and I worked at an agricultural biotechnology company. And one day I was asked to do an experiment where, off the books, the company wanted to know whether a certain piece of genetic material was in their product, but they didn't want it to be on the books. They didn't want the company to officially have the knowledge of whether or not that piece of genetic material was in their product. So I did the experiment, and it was in there.
It was.
It was.
Are we talking like aborted fetal tissue or something?
No, this was for an agricultural.
Oh, agriculture,
biotech, So
okay.
it was plants.
Okay.
But I learned at that time how large companies work. A lot of times they do science, or they don't do science, or do science off the books because of things they officially don't want to know about their product. And so they basically maintained plausible deniability as far as what genetic components were in their product. And I was kind of part of a cover-up, but I was just doing what I was told. Anyway, I decided to leave science partly for that reason, because I wanted to pursue a career where I wouldn't have these ethical dilemmas. So I became a nurse. And I thought, all you have to do is take care of patients. You would never have an ethical dilemma as a nurse. So I became a nurse in 2008 and went into critical care. And eventually I was asked by the hospital I was working for to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, I had never been very keen on receiving any vaccines, but definitely not the COVID vaccine, because I knew that it was an mRNA vaccine, and I didn't want for my genetic makeup to be changed by anyone other than God. And so for me it was a no-brainer. I would never take it. Not just because of my religious convictions, but because I knew, as a scientist, I understood DNA and RNA and proteins and how they worked. And I had an understanding of the immune system and how specifically mRNA vaccines are designed to, so how an mRNA vaccine works. You receive the mRNA in your body, and there's mechanisms within the vaccine that cause your cells to generate, in this case, the spike protein. And as the cells in your body generate the spike protein, your immune system then attacks the cells that are expressing that protein, in addition to attacking the virus that's in your body. But I knew right away that it would be a bad idea to engineer your cells to generate a protein that your immune system is going to attack, because I knew that your immune system would wind up attacking the cells in your body that are expressing the protein. It just sounded like a really bad idea, given all of the immune diseases there are out there. So that's another reason not to receive the vaccine. It's common sense that you wouldn't induce your body to generate an immune response against itself. It's ridiculous.
How much pressure did they put you under?
Well, I got fired, so a lot. And it felt vindictive. The hospital that I worked, when they sent the email stating that receiving the COVID-19 vaccine was a condition of employment, the email they sent was very difficult to read. It was all fine print with links in it describing where you can get the vaccine, how you can get it, but if you don't, there might be a few exceptions for people with religious or medical exemptions. And of course I applied for a religious exemption, and the process to apply for a religious exemption was incredibly cumbersome. I have a background in using computers. I have a home office. I've used computers my entire life, but if I was somebody who had been lesser educated, if I didn't have a computer savvy job, I wouldn't have been able to do it, because you had to write down your explanation of your religious beliefs. You had to download things and upload things, and just the process of getting your information onto their portal was technically difficult. In addition, the email they sent me, I worked for a Catholic hospital, and they said even the Pope has said that receiving the COVID-19 vaccination is okay. Well, I'm a Catholic, and so how can they've already presented the notion that the Catholic Church says it's okay. How are they going to give me a religious exemption?
And the Pope is not God, so whatever.
Exactly, but it's a Catholic hospital. They're basically telling me what the Catholic Church has said, and I'm like, well, I'm a Catholic, but I still believe that I shouldn't get the vaccine. Anyway, so there was a lot of pressure initially, and then a lot of pressure at work with the team that I worked on was like my boss, my supervisor, was all just very, they knew that I was resistant to getting the vaccine, and they weren't friendly. It was a cold environment for me.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So they fired you?
They fired me, and three of my other employees, 3 of my friends.
So you were not on your own. 4 of you stood firm.
4 of us stood firm. There were a lot of people that caved, that didn't want to get it.
Did you ever see any COVID shot reactions while you were still able to work?
I didn't. Let me think. I didn't. Yes, I did.
Okay.
At the time I was getting fired during that time frame, I didn't. More recently, though, I have. I have a patient who had come in very, very young adult, with absolutely no health history whatsoever, and came in from another hospital on ECMO, which is ECMO is an extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. It means that they're on a heart-lung machine,
Right.
oxygenating their blood, and when they came in, they weren't exactly sure what was causing their myocarditis. And so they started to explore different possibilities. And when I see a young person with no health history come in with myocarditis, just given what I've seen in the news, I automatically look to see if they've been vaccinated, because I know that there's an observed correlation. So indeed, this patient had been vaccinated, I believe 3 times. And so she was on ECMO. She was Her kidneys had shut down. She was on dialysis. She had shock liver. She also had some blood clotting issues, and they had to cut fasciotomies into her legs to really, because she had compartment syndrome in her legs. And she had coded several times, and she had an anoxic brain injury. But what's interesting about this girl, she's in the hospital for several weeks, and it's a big hospital. So it's a big hospital with a lot of resources, and they had consulted many, many different types of physicians to try to determine what the cause of the myocarditis was. And my first thought was, well, let's see if she's vaccinated. So I went through the chart, and I noticed that every single physician, when you are a physician and you don't know what's causing an illness, you come up with a differential diagnosis. And a differential diagnosis is basically anything that could possibly cause the symptoms of what you're looking at. And so you make a list of all the things that could possibly cause this ailment. And then you go through and you start to rule out things. Well, it couldn't be this, it couldn't be this, and you kind of narrow it down to make your definitive diagnosis. But what was interesting in her chart, among all of the different doctors and all of the different differential diagnoses, they never ever mentioned that she was vaccinated. It's in her chart. All you have to do is click on the tab under immunizations. You can see that she's vaccinated, but they never included it. Not one doctor included in her differential diagnosis that the possibility of her was that she was vaccinated. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like,
Did you speak to anybody about that?
God, no. No, I'd get fired super fast. I mean, because there's a hive mentality, and the hospital I'm associated with is very closely associated with an institution that receives hundreds of millions of dollars from the NIAID. So, no. I think if I brought that up,
They would have fired you again?
yeah, I would. Yeah, I think that I would be, and I think that the reason that none of those physicians mentioned that as a possibility is because they're all afraid of getting fired.
And there lies the problem.
And therein lies the problem. I heard a physician last week talking to another physician, and he said, "Are you going to get the next vaccine?" The first physician said, "Well, I got the first one because I wanted to keep my job, but given the evidence that we have now, it's not worth the risk. You know, I wouldn't get it again." So they know. The physicians know that the vaccine is risky and sometimes lethal.
So, do you have a job now?
I do.
Good.
For now.
Are they in another hospital?
I do, yeah. So I switched hospitals, got fired from the first one, and then within a month I actually got a really good job. Yeah. So.
And do you think if we go into another mandated shot situation that this hospital could potentially come for you, or do you think this is a better one?
I think that this hospital is more, they gave me an exemption, a religious exemption.
So you're good.
Which was a surprise to me. But the whole COVID-19 disease and vaccine, it's a religion. It's a cult. If you don't believe in their deity, which I guess would be Anthony Fauci, if you don't believe their prophets and their oracles, which would be Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or any celebrity or any politician that's telling you what the truth is, if you don't accept their truth, if you don't accept their sacrament, which is the vaccine itself, you're going to be expelled. You're going to be shunned, shamed. You're not going to be accepted in society. You can't fly on an airplane or whatever. It's a religion. It's I think we have a First Amendment is supposed to prevent the government from creating a religion, one that you are being forced to believe in and to participate in. It's very unfortunate.
What is your advice to people going into the fall when things will start to ramp up? The big catch up with Chelsea Clinton, the new virus, the new variant, the new vaccine, the new shot thing, all hammering RSV, goodness knows what, blah, blah, blah. What's your advice as a critical care nurse? What is your advice?
As a critical care nurse, I would say absolutely don't get the vaccine. Don't, because the chances of you dying from COVID are extremely limited compared to the suffering that you could have if you were vaccinated. So,
is there anything else you want to say? That was brilliant. Thank you so much for your amazingness and for educating us and just being so truthful and brave. Thank you.
thank you.
The truth is, vaccine injuries are real and they've been ignored.
These childhood vaccinations, the people of America are telling us they are not safe and effective. We are seriously concerned at Children's Health Defense about the disinformation and misinformation out there.
Society does not want to acknowledge vaccine injury, period. My son's life has been ruined physically and emotionally, and he is persecuted for the mere fact that he exists.
After 8 years of litigation, HHS conceded by preponderance of the evidence that Chris died from her HPV vaccinations.
Parents deserve the truth. We deserve real, informed consent, because no parent should have to live the nightmare I do.
I am heartbroken to hear these stories. And it makes me want to do something.
How about we ban pharmaceutical ads on TV?
I've advocated it, and you have a co-sponsor.
The government has decided that this particular industry doesn't have to be liable to anybody.
I am extremely suspicious as a lawyer of immunity that is granted in any blanket way across the board to any manufacturer or to anyone.
So if we're going to do something, the North Star has got to be medical freedom. I get to decide what's good for me and my family with proper information. And if I'm given improper information, just like in any other industry, there's got to be accountability.
No more Pfizer-sponsored science. We need independent science.
I am competing against a pharmaceutical lobby of 1,600 lobbyists. That's 3 lobbyists for each member of Congress. This is insane.
Everybody sitting here, bar 2, vaccinated their families with catastrophic results. Over 12,000 signatures on those 2 buses of death, death, death. When will enough be enough? How many more buses? So this has to stop. And we implore you, please, to follow us at Children's Health Defense, at least break down the truth and get to the truth behind the science of what is really happening.